The sun was setting behind the distant mountains, casting an eerie orange glow over the dense forest that lined the narrow, winding road. A soft mist began to rise from the ground, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that seemed to blur the line between reality and the supernatural. The chirping of cicadas filled the air, gradually giving way to the haunting calls of night creatures as darkness slowly enveloped the landscape. The car, an old and somewhat battered Toyota, moved cautiously along the road, its headlights cutting through the growing gloom. Inside the vehicle, the atmosphere was a mix of excitement and apprehension. Haruka, a young woman in her late 20s, sat in the passenger seat, her eyes scanning the road ahead with a mix of curiosity and unease. Her boyfriend, Kenji, was behind the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel a bit too tightly. In the back seat, Haruka's younger brother, Yuta, and his friend Mika were chatting animatedly, their voices a welcome distraction from the creeping sense of foreboding. "We're almost there," Kenji announced, glancing at the GPS mounted on the dashboard. "Just a few more kilometers and we'll reach the campsite." Haruka nodded, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled in her stomach. She had heard stories about this road, tales of strange occurrences and unexplained disappearances, but she had dismissed them as mere urban legends. Now, as the shadows deepened and the road seemed to narrow, she couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to those stories. "Hey, did you guys know that this road is supposed to be haunted?" Yuta's voice broke through her thoughts, his tone filled with excitement. Mika laughed, though there was a nervous edge to it. "Come on, Yuta, don't start with those ghost stories. You're going to scare Haruka." Haruka forced a smile, turning in her seat to look at her brother. "It's fine, Mika. I'm not that easily scared." But as she spoke, she couldn't help but glance out the window at the darkening forest, her imagination conjuring up images of ghostly figures lurking among the trees. Kenji chuckled, though his eyes remained focused on the road. "Let's not get too carried away with ghost stories. We've got a long night ahead of us." The road continued to wind through the forest, the trees closing in on either side like silent sentinels. The mist grew thicker, swirling around the car in ghostly tendrils that seemed to reach out towards them. The conversation in the car died down, replaced by an uneasy silence that seemed to mirror the growing tension outside. As they rounded a particularly sharp bend, the car's headlights suddenly illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road. Kenji slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching in protest as the car came to a sudden stop. The figure, a woman dressed in a tattered white kimono, stood motionless, her long, black hair hanging down over her face. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. The only sound, the pounding of their hearts and the soft rustling of the leaves in the wind. Is she real?" Mika whispered, her voice trembling. Haruka felt a chill run down her spine as she stared at the figure. There was something deeply unsettling about her, something that set off alarm bells in her mind. Kenji slowly unbuckled his seatbelt, his eyes never leaving the woman. "I'll go check on her. Maybe she needs help." Haruka reached out, grabbing his arm. "No, Kenji. There's something wrong about this. Let's just go." But Kenji shook his head, gently prying her fingers away. "We can't just leave her here. What if she's hurt?" He opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air, the mist swirling around his legs as he approached the woman. Haruka watched, her heart pounding in her chest, as Kenji slowly made his way towards the figure. The woman didn't move, didn't make a sound, as if she were a statue, carved out of the night itself. As Kenji got closer, he reached out a hand, his voice gentle. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" For a moment, there was no response. Then, with a sudden, almost unnatural speed, the woman's head snapped up, revealing a face twisted in a grotesque, inhuman snarl. Her eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and a guttural, otherworldly scream tore from her lips. Kenji stumbled back, his face a mask of terror. But before he could react, the woman lunged at him, her hands clawing at his throat. Haruka screamed, the sound echoing through the forest as she watched in horror. Kenji tried to fight back, but the woman's strength was far beyond that of any human. In a matter of moments, he was on the ground, his body convulsing as the woman's hands tightened around his neck. Without thinking, Haruka threw open her door and ran towards them, her mind a blur of fear and desperation. But as she reached out to pull the woman away, a cold, invisible force knocked her back, sending her sprawling to the ground. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the woman's glowing eyes, filled with a hatred that seemed to burn through the very fabric of reality. When Haruka regained consciousness, she found herself lying on the cold, hard ground, the taste of blood in her mouth. The car was gone, as was Kenji, and the forest was eerily silent. The only sound, the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. She struggled to her feet, her body aching, and looked around in confusion. There was no sign of the woman, no sign of the struggle that had just taken place. It was as if everything had been swallowed up by the night, leaving no trace behind. "Yuta! Mika!" she called out, her voice hoarse. But there was no response, only the oppressive silence of the forest. Panic began to set in as she stumbled through the trees, her mind racing. What had happened to Kenji? Where were Yuta and Mika? And what was that thing that had attacked them? As she wandered through the forest, her thoughts a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent her heart racing, her eyes darting around in search of some unseen threat. Hours seemed to pass as she wandered aimlessly, the forest around her, becoming an endless maze of shadows and whispers. Just when she was about to give up hope, she stumbled upon a small, dilapidated shrine hidden among the trees. Its ancient wooden structure was covered in moss and vines, and the air around it felt heavy with an almost palpable sense of dread. Desperate for some semblance of safety, Haruka approached the shrine, her steps hesitant. As she neared the entrance, she noticed a small, weathered sign written in kanji, "Beware the curse of the forest." A shiver ran down her spine as she read the words, her mind racing with thoughts of the stories she had heard. Could this be the source of the curse that haunted the road? With a deep breath, she stepped inside the air, inside the shrine, cold and musty. The interior was small and dimly lit, the only light coming from a few flickering candles placed around a worn altar. On the altar lay a series of ancient scrolls, their edges frayed and yellowed with age. Curiosity getting the better of her, Haruka carefully unrolled one of the scrolls, her eyes scanning the faded ink. The writing was old and difficult to decipher, but as she read, a chilling story began to unfold. It spoke of a vengeful spirit, a woman who had been wronged and had taken her own life in the forest centuries ago. Her spirit, consumed by hatred and sorrow, had cursed the land, dooming all who traveled the road to a fate worse than death. Haruka's heart sank as she realized the truth. The woman they had encountered was the vengeful spirit, and they had unwittingly become entangled in her curse. She had to find a way to break the curse to save Kenji and the others. But how? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, chilling breeze that swept through the shrine, extinguishing the candles and plunging the room into darkness. Haruka's breath caught in her throat as she felt a cold, ghostly presence closing in around her. She turned to run, but her legs refused to move, frozen in place by an unseen force. A soft, whispering voice filled her ears, its words like ice on her skin. "You cannot escape, you are mine." The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was the glowing eyes of the vengeful spirit, burning with an unholy light. Haruka awoke to the sound of rustling leaves and the distant calls of night creatures. The forest around her was bathed in an eerie twilight, the moonlight filtering through the dense canopy above. She felt a cold dampness seeping through her clothes and realized she was lying on the forest floor. A shiver ran down her spine as she remembered the events that had led her here. Kenji's terrifying encounter with the ghostly woman, the cold force that had knocked her unconscious, and the ancient shrine with its haunting message. She struggled to her feet, her body itching from the fall. As she looked around, the oppressive silence of the forest seemed to close in on her. There was no sign of the car, no sign of Kenji, Yuta, or Mika. Panic began to set in as she called out their names, her voice echoing through the trees. Kenji, Yuta, Mika. But there was no response, only the rustling of leaves in the wind. Haruka knew she couldn't stay here. She had to find her friends and figure out how to break the curse that had ensnared them. With a deep breath, she started walking, her eyes scanning the forest for any sign of a path or a clue. The forest seemed to stretch on endlessly, the trees towering above her like silent sentinels. As she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that unseen eyes were following her every move. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to stay calm, her mind racing with thoughts of the vengeful spirit and the curse that haunted the road. After what felt like hours of walking, she stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center stood an old, weathered torii gate, its wooden structure covered in moss and vines. The sight of it sent a shiver down her spine, but she knew she had to investigate. As she approached the gate, she noticed a narrow path leading deeper into the forest. With a sense of foreboding, she stepped through the gate and onto the path, the air around her growing colder with each step. The path was narrow and winding, the trees closing in on either side, like walls of a labyrinth. Haruka felt a growing sense of unease as she walked, the shadows around her seeming to twist and shift in the corner of her vision. She tried to stay focused, her mind racing with thoughts of her friends and the curse that bound them. Just as she was about to turn back, she heard a faint sound in the distance. It was a soft, melodic humming, like a lullaby carried on the wind. Haruka's heart skipped a beat as she followed the sound, her steps quickening. The path opened up into another clearing, and there, standing in the moonlight, was a figure. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing white kimono, her long black hair cascading down her back. She was the same woman they had encountered on the road, the vengeful spirit that had attacked Kenji. Haruka's blood ran cold as the woman turned to face her, her eyes glowing with an unholy light. "You," the woman whispered, her voice echoing through the clearing. "You have come to break the curse." Haruka's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the spirit, her mind racing. "Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling. The woman stepped closer, her eyes never leaving Haruka's. "I am the spirit of this forest, bound by a curse that has lasted for centuries. My soul cannot rest until the wrongs done to me are avenged." Haruka felt a chill run down her spine as the woman's words sank in. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The spirit's eyes glowed with a fierce light as she recounted her story. "Long ago, I was betrayed by those I trusted. They took my life and left me to die in this forest. My soul was consumed by hatred and sorrow, and I cursed this land, dooming all who travel this road." Haruka's heart ached as she listened to the spirit's tale. "I want to help you," she said softly, "but I don't know how." The spirit's gaze softened slightly, and she nodded. "There is a way to break the curse, but it will not be easy. You must find the relics that bind my soul to this forest and return them to the shrine." Haruka's mind raced with questions, but before she could ask anything, the spirit began to fade. "Remember," she whispered, her voice growing faint, "the relics are hidden in the places where I suffered the most. Only by facing the past can you free us all." With that, the spirit vanished, leaving Haruka alone in the clearing. She felt a sense of determination rise within her. She had to find the relics and break the curse, not just for the spirit, but for her friends as well. As she turned to leave the clearing, she heard a familiar voice calling her name, "Haruka." She spun around to see Yuta and Mika running towards her, their faces filled with relief. "You're okay," Yuta exclaimed, wrapping her in a tight hug. Mika's eyes were wide with fear as she looked around the clearing. "Where's Kenji?" Haruka's heart sank as she realized she hadn't seen him since the attack. "We have to find him," she said urgently. "And we need to break the curse." Yuta and Mika nodded, their expressions determined. Together, they set off into the forest, determined to find Kenji and the relics that would free the spirit from her torment. The forest seemed even more foreboding as they walked, the shadows growing darker and the air colder. Haruka couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the spirit was guiding them towards their goal. After what felt like hours of walking, they stumbled upon a small, abandoned village hidden deep within the forest. The buildings were old and decrepit, their wooden structures crumbling with age. Haruka felt a sense of unease as they explored the village, the air thick with the weight of the past. In the center of the village, they found a small shrine, similar to the one Haruka had seen before. It was there that they discovered the first relic, a small, intricately carved wooden amulet. Haruka felt a surge of hope as she picked it up, knowing they were one step closer to breaking the curse. But as they prepared to leave the village, they heard a low, guttural growl that sent chills down their spines. They turned to see a shadowy figure emerging from the darkness, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It was the spirit, but she was no longer the same. Her form had twisted into something monstrous, her face contorted with rage and hatred. "You will not leave this place alive," she hissed, her voice echoing through the village. Haruka's heart pounded in her chest as they backed away, their minds racing with thoughts of escape. But before they could react, the spirit lunged at them, her clawed hands reaching out with deadly intent. Haruka felt a surge of fear as she realized they were trapped, with no way to escape the spirit's wrath. In a desperate bid to protect her friends, she held up the amulet, hoping it would have some effect on the spirit. To her surprise, the spirit recoiled, her eyes widening in fear. "You have found one of the relics," she snarled, her voice filled with fury. "But you will not find the others." With a sudden, violent gust of wind, the spirit vanished, leaving Haruka, Yuta, and Mika alone in the village. Haruka felt a sense of relief wash over her, but she knew their ordeal was far from over. They had to find the remaining relics and return them to the shrine if they were to break the curse and save Kenji. Determined, they set off into the forest once more, their hearts filled with a mix of fear and hope. As they walked, Haruka couldn't shake the feeling that the spirit was watching them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. Haruka's thoughts were consumed with the task ahead, her mind racing with thoughts of the relics and the curse that bound them. They had to find the remaining relics and break the curse, no matter the cost. With renewed determination, they pressed on, their eyes scanning the forest for any sign of the relics that would free them from the spirit's grasp. The journey was long and arduous, the forest seemingly endless, but Haruka knew they couldn't give up. Their lives depended on it. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the air grew colder and the shadows seemed to come alive, twisting and shifting in the corner of their vision. Haruka felt a growing sense of unease as they walked, her heart pounding in her chest. The spirit's presence was ever more palpable, a constant reminder of the danger they face, but they pressed on, determined to find the relics and break the curse. Their journey took them to the darkest corners of the forest, where the air was thick with an oppressive sense of dread. They discovered the second relic hidden in the roots of an ancient tree, its bark gnarled and twisted. It was a small, intricately carved wooden figure, similar to the amulet they had found in the village. Haruka felt a surge of hope as she picked it up, knowing they were one step closer to breaking the curse. But as they prepared to leave, they heard the spirit's voice echoing through the trees. "You will not escape," she hissed, her voice filled with fury. Haruka's heart pounded in her chest as they backed away, their minds racing with thoughts of escape. But before they could react, the spirit appeared before them, her form twisted and monstrous. With a sudden, violent gust of wind, she lunged at them, her clawed hands reaching out with deadly intent. Haruka felt a surge of fear as she realized they were trapped, with no way to escape the spirit's wrath. In a desperate bid to protect her friends, she held up the wooden figure, hoping it would have some effect on the spirit. To her surprise, the spirit recoiled, her eyes widening in fear. "You have found another relic," she snarled, her voice filled with fury. "But you will not find the others." With another violent gust of wind, the spirit vanished, leaving Haruka, Yuta, and Mika alone in the cave. Haruka felt a sense of relief wash over her, but she knew their ordeal was far from over. They had to find the remaining relics and return them to the shrine if they were to break the curse and save Kenji. Determined, they set off into the forest once more, their hearts filled with a mix of fear and hope. As they walked, Haruka couldn't shake the feeling that the spirit was watching them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. Haruka's thoughts were consumed with the task ahead, her mind racing with thoughts of the relics and the curse that bound them. They had to find the remaining relics and break the curse, no matter the cost. With renewed determination, they pressed on, their eyes scanning the forest for any sign of the relics that would free them from the spirit's grasp. Their journey was long and arduous, the forest seemingly endless, but Haruka knew they couldn't give up. Their lives depended on it. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale, ghostly light over the forest. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl and the rustle of leaves underfoot. Haruka, Yuta, and Mika pressed on through the darkness, their footsteps muffled by the dense undergrowth. Each step seemed to echo with the weight of the curse that hung over them. Haruka's heart pounded in her chest, a relentless drumbeat of fear and determination. They had to find the final relic and break the curse before it was too late. The path through the forest was narrow and winding, twisting like a serpent through the shadows. The further they went, the darker and more oppressive the forest seemed to become. The trees closed in around them, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. Haruka felt a chill run down her spine as she glanced around, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of the vengeful spirit. They had encountered her twice already, each time barely escaping with their lives. She knew that the next encounter could be their last if they weren't careful. "Do you think we're close?" Yuta asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Haruka nodded, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. "I think so. The spirit said the relics are hidden in the places where she suffered the most. We've found 3 already. The last one must be close." Mika shivered, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "I just want this to be over. I want to go home." Haruka reached out and squeezed her friend's hand, offering what little comfort she could. "We will, Mika. We just have to stay strong a little longer." They continued on in silence, each lost in their thoughts. The forest seemed to stretch on endlessly, a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. But Haruka felt a growing sense of urgency, a feeling that they were running out of time. The spirit was growing more powerful with each passing moment, and she knew they had to act quickly if they were to save Kenji and break the curse. After what felt like hours of walking, they stumbled upon another clearing. In the center stood an ancient, weathered shrine, its wooden structure covered in moss and vines. Haruka's heart skipped a beat as she approached, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. The air around the shrine felt heavy with a palpable sense of dread, as if the very fabric of reality was warped by the curse. "This must be it," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "The final relic must be here." Yuta and Mika nodded, their expressions grim but resolute. They knew what they had to do. Together, they approached the shrine, their steps slow and cautious. Haruka reached out and pushed open the door, the old wood creaking in protest. Inside, the shrine was dimly lit by flickering candles, their flames casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. In the center of the room, on a small altar, lay a single, intricately carved wooden box, Haruka's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the box, her hands trembling. This was it, the final relic. With a deep breath, she reached out and lifted the lid, revealing a small, delicate hairpin, its surface inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Haruka felt a surge of hope as she picked it up, knowing they were one step closer to breaking the curse. But as she turned to leave, the air in the room grew cold and the candles flickered and died. A low, guttural growl echoed through the shrine, sending chills down their spines. The vengeful spirit appeared before them, her form twisted and monstrous, her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "You will not leave this place alive," she hissed, her voice filled with fury. Haruka's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away, the hairpin clutched tightly in her hand. "We have to get out of here," she whispered urgently. Yuta and Mika nodded, their faces pale with fear. They turned and ran, the spirit's enraged screams echoing through the shrine. As they fled into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around them, the shadows twisting and shifting in the moonlight. Haruka could feel the spirit's presence close behind, her cold breath on the back of her neck. They had to reach the main shrine and return the relics before the spirit caught them. Their footsteps pounded on the forest floor, the undergrowth tugging at their legs as they ran. Haruka's mind raced with thoughts of the curse and the relics, her heart filled with a desperate hope. They had come so far, and she refused to give up now. The path through the forest seemed to stretch on forever, but finally, they saw the Torii gate in the distance, its weathered wood glowing in the moonlight. They stumbled through the gate and into the clearing, the ancient shrine standing tall before them. Haruka felt a surge of determination as she approached the altar. The relics clutched tightly in her hands. She placed each one on the altar, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The air around them seemed to thrum with energy, the very ground beneath their feet vibrating with the power of the curse. The spirit appeared before them, her form flickering and shifting in the moonlight. "You think you can break the curse?" she snarled, her eyes glowing with fury. "You will never succeed." Haruka's heart pounded in her chest as she faced the spirit, her hands trembling. "We have to try," she said, her voice filled with determination. The spirit lunged at them, her clawed hands reaching out with deadly intent. But as she did, the relics on the altar began to glow with a soft, ethereal light. The spirit recoiled, her form flickering and fading in the light. "No," she screamed, her voice filled with rage and despair. The light from the relics grew brighter, enveloping the spirit and the shrine in a blinding glow. Haruka felt a surge of hope as she watched, her heart filled with a desperate longing for freedom. The spirit's screams echoed through the clearing, growing fainter and fainter until they were nothing more than a whisper on the wind. And then there was silence. The light from the relics faded, leaving the shrine bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight. Haruka felt a wave of relief wash over her as she realized the spirit was gone. The curse was broken. They had succeeded. Yuta and Mika embraced her, their faces filled with tears of joy and relief. "We did it," Yuta said, his voice choked with emotion. Haruka nodded, her heart filled with a sense of peace. They had faced the darkness and come out victorious. But as they turned to leave, Haruka felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest. She gasped, her hands clutching at her heart. Yuta and Mika's faces filled with horror as they watched, helpless. "Haruka!" Mika cried, her voice filled with panic. Haruka fell to her knees, her vision blurring. She felt a cold, ghostly hand on her shoulder, and she knew the spirit was not gone. The curse was not broken. She had failed. With a final, shuddering breath, Haruka collapsed to the ground, her eyes closing as darkness claimed her. The last thing she heard was the spirit's mocking laughter, echoing through the night. The forest fell silent once more, the moonlight casting long shadows over the clearing. The curse remained, its grip unbroken, and the spirit watched, waiting for her next victims to wander into her domain. The forest was eerily silent, the moon casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the cool night breeze. Haruka lay motionless on the ground, her breath shallow, eyes fluttering open to the sight of Yuta and Mika's anxious faces. Her chest ached where the spirit's cold hand had touched, but she knew there was no time to waste. She had to find the strength to finish what they had started. The curse was still intact, the spirit's malevolent presence lingering in the air around them. "We have to keep moving," Haruka whispered, her voice barely audible. Yuta helped her to her feet, his expression a mix of fear and determination. "We can't give up now. We're so close." Mika nodded, her eyes wide with resolve. "But what do we do now? We've gathered all the relics, haven't we?" Haruka took a deep breath, steadying herself. The spirit said the relics must be returned to the shrine. "We need to place them correctly and recite the prayer to break the curse." The ancient prayer had been inscribed on the walls of the shrine, a final piece of the puzzle that Haruka had overlooked in her haste. They retraced their steps to the shrine, each step heavy with the weight of their mission. The forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows deeper and more menacing than before. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig set their nerves on. For example, as they reached the shrine, Haruka could feel the spirit's presence growing stronger, an oppressive weight that pressed down on them. They approached the altar, the relics still glowing faintly with a supernatural light. Haruka placed the wooden amulet, the carved figure, and the mask on the altar, arranging them carefully. The final relic, the delicate hairpin, she held in her trembling hand. "We need to recite the prayer now," she said, her voice shaking. Yuta and Mika stood beside her, their faces pale but determined. Haruka began to recite the ancient words, her voice steadying as she went on. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, the relics glowing brighter with each word. As the final syllable left her lips, a sudden, violent gust of wind swept through the shrine, extinguishing the candles and plunging them into darkness. The spirit appeared before them, her form more monstrous than ever, her eyes burning with fury. "You think you can break the curse?" she snarled, her voice echoing through the shrine. "You will never succeed." Haruka felt a surge of fear but stood her ground. "We have to try," she said, her voice filled with determination. The spirit lunged at them, her clawed hands reaching out with deadly intent. But as she did, the relics on the altar began to glow with a blinding light, enveloping the spirit and the shrine. Haruka felt a surge of hope as she watched, her heart pounding in her chest. The light grew brighter, and the spirit's form began to dissolve, her screams echoing through the clearing. "No!" she screamed, her voice filled with rage and despair. Haruka watched in awe as the light consumed the spirit, her form flickering and fading until she was nothing more than a wisp of shadow. The oppressive weight lifted, and a sense of peace washed over them. The curse was broken. They had succeeded. Haruka fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Yuta and Mika embraced her, their faces filled with relief and joy. "We did it," Yuta said, his voice choked with emotion. Haruka nodded, her heart filled with a sense of peace. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but their joy was short-lived. As they turned to leave the shrine, Haruka felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest. She gasped, her hands clutching at her heart. Yuta and Mika's faces filled with horror as they watched, helpless. "Haruka!" Mika cried, her voice filled with panic. Haruka fell to the ground, her vision blurring. She felt a cold, ghostly hand on her shoulder, and she knew the spirit was not truly gone. The curse was not completely broken. With a final, shuddering breath, Haruka collapsed, her eyes closing as darkness claimed her. The last thing she heard was the spirit's mocking laughter, echoing through the night. The forest fell silent once more, the moonlight casting long shadows over the clearing. The curse remained, its grip unbroken, and the spirit watched, waiting for her next victims to wander into her domain. Haruka woke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest. She sat up, the cold forest floor beneath her, Yuta and Mika by her side. "Haruka, are you okay?" Yuta asked, his voice filled with concern. Haruka took a deep breath, steadying herself. "We have to finish this," she said, her voice firm. "The relics, we missed something." Mika looked confused, "But we placed them and recited the prayer." Haruka shook her head. "There's more to it. The spirit's torment must be acknowledged. We need to understand her pain and offer restitution." Yuta nodded. "How do we do that?" Haruka thought for a moment, then remembered the shrine's inscriptions. There were symbols, drawings. They might hold the key. They returned to the shrine, the oppressive air thick with anticipation. Haruka inspected the walls, her fingers tracing the ancient symbols. She found an etching of a woman surrounded by flames, another of a family bound in chains. "We need to recreate these scenes," Haruka said. "It's a symbolic act. We have to show we understand her suffering." Using twigs and leaves, they recreated the scenes on the ground before the altar. Haruka placed the relics within the makeshift drawings. Her heart heavy with the weight of their task, they stood back, the air around them humming with energy. Haruka began to recite the prayer again, this time with a deep sense of empathy and sorrow for the spirit's suffering. The relics glowed, the drawings on the ground illuminating with a soft light. A low, mournful wail echoed through the shrine, the spirit's form appearing once more. But this time, she was not monstrous. She was a sorrowful figure, her eyes filled with tears. "You understand my pain," she whispered, her voice a haunting melody. Haruka nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We do. We're sorry for what happened to you." The spirit's form shimmered, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. With a final, soft sigh, the spirit dissolved into the light, her presence lifting from the forest. The oppressive air cleared, replaced by a sense of peace and tranquility. The curse was truly broken. Haruka, Yuta, and Mika stood in the clearing, the weight of the ordeal lifting from their shoulders. They embraced, their hearts filled with relief and joy. As they left the shrine, the first light of dawn began to break through the trees. Casting a warm glow over the forest, they walked back through the now peaceful woods, the sense of dread replaced by the beauty of the early morning. Birds began to sing, and the forest came alive with the sounds of a new day. Haruka felt a deep sense of accomplishment and closure. They had faced the darkness, understood its pain, and brought light to a haunted place. As they reached the edge of the forest, Haruka turned back for one last look at the shrine. The ancient structure stood tall and proud, a testament to their bravery and empathy. She knew the spirit was at peace now, her suffering acknowledged and her soul set free. Haruka, Yuta, and Mika walked on, the bond between them strengthened by their shared experience. They knew they would never forget the haunted road, the cursed forest, and the spirit who had found peace. The road trip that had started with fear and suspense had ended in redemption and understanding. And as they drove away, the forest stood as a silent witness to their journey, its shadows now a place of peace and rest. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting its warm light over the landscape. And the curse of the haunted road was finally laid to rest.